this is kind of one of those things that some people listening might think would be a stretch, that this network of cathedrals and the spires and all this was a energy grid, a way to harness ethereal energy, let's say. But we're really not that far off from that when we look at the emergence of churches and religions with a critical eye, and we think about, well, these buildings were built to inspire. Like, there's a whole contingency of alternative researchers that looks at cathedrals and says, the infrastructure here was designed to affect your consciousness, and then it was layered with the pipe organ that would have a frequency effect. It was layered potentially with entheogen use, and now in Catholicism, it's the wine and the cracker. But that could have been a holdover from some certain compound that maybe did let you commune with the higher level in this context with the organ and the chanting and the choir and everything that's built into the geometry of the building. There's a whole area of research, that looks at that kind of stuff. It's only 1 degree away to say, well, really it was about energy harvesting or energy welling up from the ether. Explain that a little bit, because I think that is one of the furthest reaches in the work for people to wrap their heads around.
Let's start with the people that said they built the buildings did not. And they did not build it for the reason, and it wasn't the original purpose of these beautiful cathedrals.
Mm-hmm.
And I have done quite a bit of research on the whole idea of circuit board earth and
Yes,
and the use of these buildings as part of a perfectly tuned scientific and musical instrument. So if you look at places, okay, so we talk about the typical cathedral with the spires and the arches and the windows and the organs. And you'll have like a rosette window right where the organ pipes come up. Just like right there.
mm-hmm.
And these windows are in the shape of frequencies. So let's see these as healing temples. Temples of energy and sound that were there for the benefit of all. And let's say people would come and gather to resonate with each other and heal. And there's a trigger in the word energy harvesting because it was a positive energy harvesting. But what's been taking place with the new world is reverse engineering everything to become a negative energy harvesting system.
Mm-hmm.
And actually harvesting our energy. Or take, somebody it's going somewhere. And so you've got that in these churches with these spires, you've got that in stadiums. Something is using our energy bodies,
Right,
because we don't know who we are, and we don't see ourselves as energy beings, but we are.
mm-hmm.
And so they kind of plug into that. So the best example is like the movie The Matrix, for those that have seen it.
Right.
Think of that as a documentary.
Or human batteries or something else.
Or batteries. And so that's kind of what they did, was just rewire the whole system to benefit them without telling us. And we think we're going to an amusement park to have fun, but these amusement parks were part of this original system, and I think they were like part of the way that the system was recharged, because these trolley parks were at the terminals of streetcar lines. And so they were at the very end of the line. Well, the story goes that the company built them to attract ridership for the trolley cars on weekends or whatever. They were already there, and they were used for a while, and then there would be a mysterious fire or something would happen to these trolley parks. And before you know it, by, let's say, the 1940s, trolley systems that were once everywhere are no longer there. And they've replaced it with Ford's vehicle. So now we're driving cars that are fueled by gas that is being profited by the few. And then you have insurance, and you have accidents, and you have pollution. But we think we're doing good with our car. That we then take and, especially ATVs and things like that, driving over these dunes or going to these places. Yeehaw! And, it's destroying the environment. I live near Sedona, same idea. These they go out there and they have the best old time in a very sacred place on the Earth's grid system. A lot of parks are built on top of sacred sites.
Right. National parks, local parks, state parks, the whole thing.
So then you have sites that were, at one time revered. You just, go walking along with your family and talking or playing music or whatever you do when you go out. And one of these places that I know of off the top of my head was part of my waking up to all this is south of Oklahoma City. And there's Turner Falls, which is part of the same system as Antelope and Buffalo Springs. And I was reading a book, and I want to, it probably had something to do with the Emerald Tablets or something like that. And there was a mention that this particular location was a portal to somewhere in Egypt. And this was before I really started waking up to certain things and doing my own research. But it got my curiosity because it's just an hour south of where I was living at the time. And that was also a CCC location, CCC WPA during the Roosevelt administration, New Deal. And the same is true of a lot of places in Oklahoma. CCC goes in there, builds some picnic infrastructure and, make sure there's parking and roads and bathrooms. And that was FDR killing two birds with one stone, is covering up the original civilization. And it's also giving people jobs, young men jobs. But if you go to these places, there's no way uneducated, 20-year-old laborers built what you actually see there. And that's the case with Antelope and Buffalo Springs. That's the case with Roman Nose State Park in Oklahoma. Others as well. Boiling Spring State Park.
And
they get them in there.
Yes. And I had another note here because you've mentioned the electric tram systems before, the infrastructure for railroads. Well, you do have a post, the incredible similarity of electric tram systems worldwide. And so this is another thing. If you wanted to further make the case that this was just something they dusted off or fixed and it was already in place before the takeover, this is something one would look at, right? Because to have similar tram systems worldwide, when the history we're given would be very compartmentalized and disconnected. Well, how did this emerge? It's a good point, right?
Right. And it's the same. And a lot of places have history of streetcars that don't have them anymore. And again, places you wouldn't expect to find them. Korea, Australia, Alexandria, Egypt. Worldwide, same thing.
Yeah.
And you see old pictures. There was one I saw of New Orleans and one I saw of Leeds in England. And it looked, the street scene, the city with the businesses and the buildings and the two streetcar lines going through the center of the street looked the same. One's in New Orleans, Louisiana, and the other's in Leeds, England. Put them side by side, it looks like you're looking at the same place.
Yeah.
So
there's
just
compare other buildings too, like the U.S. Capitol building has another basically mirrored building back in Europe. And without yes, people traveled, of course, but how fresh in your mind is that building going to be without some kind of reference? And to carry that reference from point A to point B, it's not super logical in the history as it's given to us that these two buildings on opposite sides of the world would be almost exact matches with an architecture that we don't even really use or see used ever. It's odd. Like, clearly there was a developed society that was more communal, because that's the only way that building gets there, or those two buildings get there. In my mind, I think you make a good case when you show those images side by side. It's hard to work out without this context of a previous age that you suggest.
So I think you're talking about St. Paul's Cathedral looking like the U.S. Capitol building. So St. Paul's
Yes.
Cathedral in London.
Yes. It's
which was
almost exact.
attributed to Sir Christopher Wren, which would have been in the late 1600s. The Great Fire of London, which was around 1666, and I do think there's something occulted in 1666. Besides the 666, that was the same year that the Cesta QV Act was passed by Parliament, which basically declared us lost at sea.
Really?
If you're familiar with that.
No, not really.
Part of their enslavement of humanity, and also that we're dead, basically. And that also Paradise Lost came out around that same time. And that talks about the fallen angels and John Milton's epic poem. And I think that was an early predictive programming that Lucifer and his fallen angel minions were kicked out of heaven and got together and decided to basically ruin God's new most favored creation, which was humanity, and went into the garden and convinced Eve to eat the apple. And I think they're telling us what they did. They came in and they messed with us, and they got us from a higher consciousness into our five senses,
right,
where we're stuck in our lower chakras.
It makes sense. But what are your thoughts on those who say, yes, a lot of this is true, we were invaded from fallen angels, but they're actually playing a role in the great cosmic play that is taking on the appearance of negativity when it's really a type of pressure that this couldn't be the soul school that it is without that pressure? I don't know if that's just being an apologist for the elite, but it does bring in the question, if this is outside of God's plan, then why doesn't God just say, all right, we're done. You can't take over this sandbox I made for humanity. I'm going to put you back in your proper place. If that isn't the role, then I wonder why it's allowed to continue.
I've asked that question myself many times. And all I can say is that there's no reason we should be waking up at all with all that's been done to us. From chemtrailing to fluoride in the water, to poisons in our food, to completely indoctrinating us in our educational system and giving us a false history. They were so thorough in what they did to keep us asleep that now's a good time to be a truther, because people can see it. Like I said earlier, it's like they just overreach constantly. Evil just overreaches and can't get enough and can't stop doing the evil things. They just can't. And we see that all the time. Now, the last couple of weeks, we've seen that. And so when a couple of years ago, I guess you could say I had a reading done by somebody, and I was like, I just don't like to see what's happening with children, among other things, but especially the children. And she said higher level souls were incarnating. And that made me feel better. Okay, so they're taking it for us while we wake up. And that this can never be allowed to happen again. And so we have to, we can't go into the same level of consciousness that they've been operating from, because that's not going to solve the problem. The only way this can be solved is for us to, go into our hearts and find a balance and not accept or approve, but to be the loving beings that we are, to move forward into a higher consciousness. And I think that's maybe why it's been so hard, is we're stuck in ego. We don't see ourselves as one. We see ourselves as separate. We see ourselves having our own identities when we really are all one and the same because of our connection to the Creator and true organic life. And when I first learned about oneness, I'm like, oh, we're all one. And then I'm kind of like, the beings behind this aren't the same as we are. So I haven't quite figured out where to put that yet. But I can go with that because there has to be some reason for it.
Right.
I just, I have to admit, I don't really understand why all of this has been allowed. But
fair enough.
There must be a reason.
There must be. And we are just in our part of the story, a very long story. So who knows exactly how it all plays out. Can you believe it, people? A video clip and a peek into how that sweet THC sausage is made. For some people, I'm sure it's nice to put a face to the name, so I started making clips that are a little more YouTube friendly than the full show tends to be. Get the full show on any podcasting platform. I prefer to keep it audio only, so we have a more decentralized distribution for a controversial show, and also so I can edit out the ums and ahs and barking dogs and all the things that happen when a person records in their home environment. And then if you really like the show, you can sign up for THC Plus, and instead of 1 hour interviews, you get the full 2 hour interview for just $8. I think that's a better deal, more of a win-win than asking you to support the show by booking a therapy session or buying generic Viagra. It's getting weird out there, folks. So just go to the highersidechats.com or click the link at the top of any set of show notes, and all your wildest dreams will come true. All right? All right. The Higherside Chat Show. Greg Carwood,